Welcome to Cherry Red TV. Our special guest today is David Thomas from Pere Ubu. Thank you for coming in, David.
My pleasure.
So I want to take you right back to Cleveland in the early 70s. Before Pere Ubu, you were in a band briefly, or for a year or so, called Rocket from the Tombs. So maybe tell us about what inspired you to form that band.
What inspired me was that I was a rock journalist at the time. I was a bit of a local celebrity. I went under the pen name Crocus Behemoth, and I would inflict my opinions on these poor sap rock bands that came to town, and I knew what they should be doing musically and how music should go, and I was at the rock and I remember it was a bit of an epiphany. I was at the local rock and roll cocaine hotel called Swingo's, where all the Dr. Hook parties of the era of rock and roll Babylon were going on, and I was interviewing a band named Black Oak, Arkansas. I don't know if you remember them or anybody remembers them. They were sort of a cod Southern boogie band, and its lead singer named Jim Dandy, and I was sitting there in this luxurious suite, asking questions, and it hit me like a brick wall that I knew what the answers were, and I didn't care anymore. I just simply didn't want to know the answers to the questions. And then I went back to the office and I thought to myself, if I'm so smart, I ought to do this music thing myself, So we put a band together from the people in the office, and that led into Rocket from the Tombs, and sort of went on from there. I just basically, I ought to just, do this myself.
So in 75-ish, you form Pere Ubu with the guitarist, Peter Laughner from Rocket. What was the point of difference? How did you feel that did you know that Pere Ubu was going to be a different commodity?
No. Pere Ubu, the idea of Pere Ubu is that I had, at that point, I figured that this whole thing had run its course, and I just wanted to leave behind a document of some of the songs we had done, because I was at that point. That was the era of the record store, the golden era of the record store. We all worked in record stores. There was an intense rivalry in Cleveland at that point. If you didn't have if you worked in a record store and you didn't have the latest Popova or Tangerine Dream album or something, then you didn't show your face in town. You just are the latest Pretty Things, outtakes. So. And one of the things we all did was go down to the Salvation Army. I don't know if they have them here, but it's like the used clothes and stuff shop, and they would have used secondhand records, and you just go through these bins of singles, and and see. I remember finding my first Music Machine single there, and it was silver ink on black paper, and it was just so magnificent. And I had and you would just buy these things from the look of the label, and think, or you study the label to see if, the usual record company, see if you recognized anybody on it, that weird chance. So I figured, well, I'm going to have a studio band only. We'll make a couple singles and then move on to real life, So that was the idea of Pere Ubu. I always have my next band name in mind as Rocket was blowing up. I figured, well, Pere Ubu, that'll be a good band name. We rehearsed, the first single was going to be 30 Seconds Over Tokyo and Final Solution, which were two Rocket songs. During the rehearsals, Heart of Darkness, we jammed Heart of Darkness together, and so I substituted that. We did the record, and all of a sudden people started buying it in New York and in Minneapolis and London and Paris and all over. It became, seemingly popular certainly for us. It was like, wow, anybody outside of town buying your record was like, So we decided, okay, well, we'll do one show just to promote the record, and then that went well, and we thought, oh well, make another one. It just went on from there.
Making your own records, though, was that commonplace?
Oh no, little Johnny Jewel beat us out. Television beat us by about 6 months. We had started talking about making our own record, and then little Johnny Jewel came out, and so we were not far after that. I just see, nobody was going to put out our record, and those, we were locally, all of the rock bands were wonderful musicians. They could do, I remember that time it was the 12 Dreams of Dr. Sardonicus by Spirit, which was a great album. But all of the cover bands could do the entire album better than Spirit could. It sounded better than the album, than the studio thing. So all of these groups, who had the big gigs, they'd play for 1,000 people doing cover versions, they all thought we were beneath contempt, really, because, we didn't wear the clothes, and we didn't seem to understand the whole nature of rock music and how you should act and what you should be doing and how you should, the whole theatricality of it, and Bowie was coming out and all of that thing. And we were just, with the exception of Peter, just sort of drab looking, and our reputation in town was just that we got really high and got on stage and beat our instruments, which was really an insult because we rehearsed certainly as much as these other bands. So we easily rehearsed 5 nights a week. We could, we were well trained and well tuned. But that's sort of what it was like. And then all of a sudden we began to sell records in London, and a big French, the Rolling Stone of France, rock and folk magazine. They sent 2 journalists over in 1975 when we were playing for 50 people at this local sailors bar, across from the ballast heaps where the lake freighters would dump the ballast before they, got pushed up towards the steel mills. Everybody had to stand on chairs in the winter because A, the place flooded regularly, and B, warm air rose. So there's these huge French journalists come over to interview us and do a huge story on us. While everybody else in town thought we were just, they couldn't, it's like, they don't even know how to dress.
Fast forward a year or so, and you've got the first album, The Modern Dance.
Mm-hmm.
And compared to later recordings, it's definitely still got a foot in the influences you're talking about, the sort of 60s garage punk, edgier end of psychedelia, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel that in hindsight, is it very much a summation of its parts in terms of the music that you were listening to, Captain Beefheart, maybe even Patti Smith, that kind of stuff?
Oh, I wasn't a Patti Smith fan. I didn't like anything that came out of New York except for Tom Verlaine. No, New York was always anyway. Bands from New York didn't know how to play. Remember, I said we rehearsed 5 nights a week. These bands in New York, it was like, geez, don't they know how to tune, or don't they rehearse, any of these guys? But anyway, that's diverting from. Yeah, I suppose but there was a certain amount of garage thing, I guess, to modern dance. There's a certain amount of avant-gardeness to modern dance. Sentimental Journey, for example, which I think is from that album. Which is an interesting thing, because to me, that whole garage rock thing, and in which you might call more abstract music, or to me, there's not a lot of difference between John Cage and John Lydon. I mean, they're both a kind of folk music. They're both. It seems to me that those types of music go together better than almost anything else. Because they're, John Cage, very talented. He's just a schlub like me. He's just, look what I can do. It's like, yeah, okay, it's. I remember that Miles Davis on the street, or is it on the corner, whatever that one was called, where he was doing the organ stuff. Krauss was nuts about that album. He just would play that damn thing all the time. And to me, that's pretty much garage. There ain't a lot of difference other than massive talent between Miles Davis and Sky Saxon from the Seeds. I mean, they both, to me, are closely related people, or in terms of their ambition and their drive and on and on and on. So to me, and to us, it's not me, it's us, it's a natural partnership. Garage, there's nothing better than a good riff, Hell, though, John Coltrane knew a good riff when he heard one, so I'm becoming incoherent, asking another question.
The next record, and we won't do every record, Dub Housing.
Yeah, you won't do the unpopular ones, will you?
We may gloss over a few. Dub Housing seems to me to be sonically quite different. On the one hand, you're signing.
It's a matured album.
Yeah, it's a bigger label, and it seems more abstract and sort of more.
It was some more. I mean, it's more of what I would call a coherent record. I mean, it's of those two. I think Dub Housing is a better record because, in the end, the Modern Dance record was sort of recorded bits and pieces over a period of time and then just finished up. Whereas Dub Housing from beginning to end was a conceived whole. So yeah, I suppose there's still good rock songs on it,
And then after the next record,
I don't know why I have to defend there being good rock songs on it.
You shouldn't defend it. You should celebrate it.
Okay.
After New Picnic Time, which is the next record, then
which I think is the masterpiece of that period.
That's your favourite of the three?
I don't know if it's my favorite. It's the masterpiece. That record is number one. The record company just went, forget this, forget this band. They wouldn't even release it in America. And it's always been this sort of albatross around our neck, that, they got too weird, they went out too far, they blah, blah, blah. And that was compounded by the fact that when we recorded that record, the studio that we worked at had just redesigned the control room, and there was this weird bias that had entered into things, and that affected the mix on that record drastically. When I prepared that album, went back to the tapes, and we fixed the bias that was on the tapes for re-release last year or this year, I can't remember. The True Magnificent, I mean, when I heard the record for the first, fixed as it were, for the first time, the thing, I burst out in the control room, we were right. All along we were right, and so that record is as close as a band, or certainly Pere Ubu, ever would get to the flame. I mean, we were being singed by the flame at that point. It's a very difficult album to listen to, and it was meant to be a very difficult album to listen to. But go ahead to the next one you want to talk about.
Well, you talk about being singed. Obviously, the band then briefly broke up.
Yeah.
Why was that?
Tom didn't like. We just had a difference of things. At that point, he broke up. He quit because things were moving in a direction he didn't care for, which was perfectly reasonable. And so we were broken up briefly. He left, and Al and I were down at the local rock club watching Talking Heads. And in the middle of their show, I turned to Alan and I said to him, we were better than these guys. And Alan turned to me and he said, Mayo Thompson, who is the guitarist in Red Crayola, who we'd met in England on tour. And so we called up Mayo and said, you want to be in the band?
And that leads us to The Art of Walking.
Walking.
So I've read that that's been described as even more abstract and even more
It's certainly abstract, yeah.
Do you think that you're on Rough Trade by now?
Mm-hmm.
Rough Trade seemed to encourage that spirit of being more...
Well, I don't know if Rough Trade encouraged it, but I mean, Rough Trade was a lovely label.
Did you feel that was a good home to be?
No, not any more than Phonogram or Fontana or Fire or Cherry Red. You know, I've always gotten along fine with record company people. I like record companies. Now, you know, the purpose of a record company is to sell records, you know, and I think that's a good idea, you know. No, I don't. The only difference between an independent record company, if there is such a thing, and a major label is that one has a lot of money and the other doesn't have so much money. You know, the people involved, certainly some years ago, and I don't have any reason to believe differently that much now, the people who run record companies like making records. They like selling records. It's their business, you know. And if we don't sell records, then I'd get rid of us. And they do, you know, from time to time. We had a manager, our first manager is a fellow named Cliff Bernstein, who currently is the manager of a little heavy metal group called Metallica, and at the time was manager of Def Leppard, Rush, he was Mr. Heavy Metal, you know, and he came in to listen to the mix of Dub Housing, because his vision for us was that we were going to be Metallica. I mean, Metallica, when he finally found his Metallica, but his idea was that we were going to be Metallica. Okay, so he comes in to listen to Dub Housing, and he said to us, oh, this is really good. All you have to do is do this 2 or 3 more times, and you're going to be superstars. And Alan looked at him and said, but what if we don't know how to do this 2 or 3 more times? Or what if we don't want to do this 2 or 3 more times? And he said, well, as long as you make good music, somebody's going to want to put it out. You know, you're not going to be superstars. You're going to struggle at times. But if you make good music, some fool is going to put it out. You know, he didn't use the word fool. So, and this was the worst thing that anybody ever said to us, because we thought, sounds pretty good. You know, it would have been much better if we'd been in fear of our. I mean, that was the thing. I mean, we were all from professional middle class families. We were all well educated. None of us went to college, but we were all smart and functional people who knew that we all could do something else, you know. So we were only going to do music if we wanted to do it, and if we got to do exactly what we want to do, you know, which is a really bad combination for record companies, because what you want kids who are afraid, in fear of their lives, you know, sort of thing, you know, as opposed to a bunch of, you know, people who just go, well, if I get to do what I want, I'll do it, you know. So that was a bad thing to tell us. But there you go.
And then Pere would break up again.
Yes, well, we like to break up. You know.
Did you find then, after 1982 and in the 6 years that followed before Pere Ubu reunited, You worked. I mean, you put out a prolific number of albums, and you worked with a dizzying array of different people. Richard Thompson seems to me to be fascinating because at first glance you wouldn't necessarily.
Oh no, Richard Thompson was Mr. Rock God in Cleveland in the early '70s. Every guitar player in our group, down at the bottom of the barrel, worshipped Richard Thompson. So when Jeff Travis at Rough Trade said, "Well, why don't you make a solo record?" I said, "Okay." And who do you want on it? Who are your wildest dreams? I don't care, just your wildest dreams. Who would you like to work with? And I said, without hesitation, Richard Thompson, of course. So that was Richard was vastly charming fellow that I had a great time. He came to town and we had some dirt grubby rehearsal place that he was perfectly happy in, being driven around in a clapped out old land tug of a car, and had a great time. But I did a lot of records.
I think 1987 you did Blame the Messenger. It seems to have led you to reform Pere Ubu.
Well, we were out touring that record, and everybody was, the fans' reaction was, "Wow, this sounds like Pere Ubu," and we were sitting there going, "Yeah, I guess it does." And so we had this what we call the Ijmuiden. I don't know how you say it, but it's this Dutch seaside town meeting, in which basically we determined the principle of it. If it looks like a duck and walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck, So, and it seemed to us, after much discussion, to be a matter of absolute cowardice if we didn't go ahead and take up the mantle of Pere Ubu again, since we looked around and everybody in the band, except for the drummer, had been in Pere Ubu, and we thought, to not become Pere Ubu again, because we am Ubu, would just be cowardly. It would be shameful.
And then for the next few years, arguably that's the most sort of commercial, if you can call it that, the most successful period commercially for Pere Ubu, with Cloudland and World.
So I'd like to interject here.
Okay.
Art of Walking is one of our best-selling albums, which is ironic. But go ahead with your things.
Well, I'm thinking more in terms of the exposure you got on Fontana. You were talking earlier about David Bates. What do you think Fontana brought to Pere Ubu? Because the albums are more accessible, if you can call it.
Sure. Well, it was
not poppy, but the songs are more.
I don't see poppy as a dirty word.
No,
I would.
But a lot of your records aren't poppy. So,
by point your opinion, it was fascinating to us because Bates brought us over and stuck us in state-of-the-art digital studios and put in connected us with extremely successful producers, and gave us all the time in the world we wanted, and it was like a vacation. It was something we had never had any access to. It was because all of our records have been made very quickly, very cheap, just bang, 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 bang. And then, we used to know when we used to keep a chart of how many minutes the songs we'd recorded. And the standard best optimum length for an album was 18 minutes a side, 36 minutes an album. So I'd keep track of how many minutes we recorded. Once we hit 36, the album's done. It wasn't any like, oh, we're going to choose this one. We didn't have outtakes. We just, 36 minutes, we're done, boys. So it was a good experience. Now, there are Ubu fans who don't care for this period because the sound is maybe more polished. I don't know. We sort of was interesting to us to hear it that way. I mean, I was telling you about that Bates wanted to do. This was the period where you'd have house mixes, remixes of some of your tracks. And he did like 4 or 5 or 6 of these things, and they, frankly, were pretty grotesque. But I went along with it for one, just because, well, we've never done it before. We're always willing to do something once. I don't know. I mean, I suspect that I would not agree to it again in case you have some ideas about this, But it was like it was for us exciting and different because we'd worked at poverty level, and this was a whole new way of doing things. And I was very keen to watch the engineers and producers work. I learned a lot of things like patience and of discipline and focus from the whole thing.
So throughout the 90s, you're busy with Pere Ubu Records, but also with other side projects. And then 1998 on Pennsylvania, you reunited with Tom Herman.
Yeah.
For the first time in nigh on 30 years.
Yeah.
It struck me that Pere Ubu and the number of musicians you played with, I mean, it must run to over 100 musicians.
No, give me a break.
But certainly it's a lot of musicians. Do you find that do you like reuniting with people and playing with them like an old friend, or is it?
No, I don't usually go backwards.
Right.
Once we part ways, that's sort of it.
Okay.
But I don't have any prejudices about it. Tom's been in and out of the band 3 times. There's other people that. Well, okay, and so I like your estimation of how many people I've played with is grossly.
It's too many, is it?
I'm not Marky Smith.
No,
Okay.
okay. I didn't mean Pere Ubu. I mean all the other records you've made as well. There's so many different musicians.
Well, there's a lot of musicians, yeah, but I tend to work with. I used to say, I'm a lot like Saddam Hussein. I only trust the people from my own village. I like to work with people who I feel there's a unity of or some connection. Not necessarily geographical, but social or history, or there's some sort of connection in there. But I'll work. I can work with, frankly, anybody. I don't like working with people who I don't like working necessarily with pop musicians who come in and proclaim, "This is my sound, man." I fundamentally disagree with the idea of having your sound. The song has a sound. Not even the band has a sound. The song is any song or slice of sound is a unique slice of space-time, with its own laws and universe, and that to me is the fundamental of what Pere Ubu does, and what music, back when I was a snotty music writer, my viewpoint of that this is what music is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a unique slice of the space-time continuum, and with its own quote-unquote God, its own physical laws, its own, I'm not sure what I think I'm not answering your question.
I think you probably have. The next record, I think, St. Arkansas, reading reviews, that seemed to be the one that baffled some people. And I wondered, with your music, is it a balance between...
What are we talking about? Which one?
St.
Arkansas. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Certainly from the...
If people are baffled by that?
Well, certainly they found it impenetrable to a degree.
Impenetrable?
But, regardless of the point I wanted to ask you was,
okay,
do you find when you're making a record that you are struck by a balance between trying to take music in a different direction or do different things, but also then mindful you've got to take people with you on that journey.
No, I'm always very proud that we've done everything we can to purge our audience every album. Wipe out the weaklings. Which isn't exactly a standard, marketplace, principle. But I'm shocked that you think it was described as impenetrable. We tell stories. That's all. That's what it comes down to. We're storytellers, and in the end, our stories are like riddles. Now, Bruce Springsteen can create great stories, but they're pretty much a straight line and pretty clear. There's no faffing about. Here's the story. He's like John Steinbeck. But our stories are riddles. Our stories are like. I learned it's no coincidence that the first Pere Ubu song, that Pere Ubu wrote, is called Heart of Darkness, and it's basically a Raymond Chandler pastiche. I mean, there's 6 or 7 lines lifted whole from Raymond Chandler novels, and that's not a coincidence, because when you read Raymond Chandler, the Philip Marlowe stories, detective novel stories, the plot, you can never figure out what the plot is. You can't, none of it makes any sense, until finally at the end, it's sort of like something happens, but even then you're not sure what happens. Well, hell, that sounds like human life to me. That sounds like, and the other thing about Raymond Chandler is that he really he's one of the few writers that has expressed the poetry of the male sex, that men basically are poetic expressions. I know this is not necessarily a popular idea, but if you read Raymond Chandler, you really begin to it's all romantic, Raymond Chandler. It's romanticized. Let's be frank about it. But that's how I learned to tell us, and I learned to tell a story from Ernest Hemingway, because I remember with a shock, when I was 11 years old, reading my first Hemingway novel, that he was telling the story by what he wasn't saying, and you had to, it wasn't even like reading between the lines, it was like reading what wasn't there, and I thought, wow, this is very interesting. And that was the principle behind Art of Walking. Art of Walking was put together to be an album that told the story as the whole idea of Art of Walking was water going down a drain, and the water going down a drain is defined by the hole the water is circling around. By what's not there defines what it is. So again, a very, very, very Raymond Chandler way of thinking about telling a story. So I think I've summarized the period. I was thinking about this in the bathtub the other day, which is where, like Archimedes, I do my best thinking. And I realized that the ultimate template for a Pere Ubu story was from the Tenement Year, a song called George Had a Hat. And the entire lyric of George Had a Hat is, George had a hat, but it wasn't where it wasn't at. Now, the whole genius of that line is the but, That's what Pere Ubu does. Pere Ubu puts the but there. George had a hat, but it wasn't where it wasn't at. Now, the implication of it is that the normal state of affairs, of course, because of the but, is that George usually has a hat that is where it isn't at, So I know this sounds pretentious and whatever, but if you had to define one characteristic of a Pere Ubu song, is that we put in but instead of an and. It should be. And normally, any other band, Bruce Springsteen would have said George had a hat and it isn't where it isn't at. but it isn't where it isn't at. Okay, you go ahead, because you got to save this interview. This is going down the drain, you know. Like,
well, but which way?
Yeah.
Well, I think there's no better moment than to bring it bang up to date. Obviously, there are a number of albums that you've released in the last few years, but you're now back with this new record, 20 Years in a Montana Missile Silo. What interested you in the process of making this record?
Number one, the first thing that I always, when I set out for a new record, I determine the methodology, how I'm going to record it, what the rules of the record are going to be. And this one I determined was going to be, the rules were going to be called, I summarize as calling it, the dark room. The idea here is you have an object in a dark blackened room, and various people are allowed to only touch or feel one part of the object and have to describe what it is. Usually it's an elephant, and one person touches the trunk and has to describe what it is, and another the ear, the tail, whatever. So this was my ambition for this album, and the way we would put it together. One of the great inspirations to me is Alfred Hitchcock. Now, Alfred Hitchcock famously said once, the problem with making movies is actors. They screw everything up. They screw the movie up. Because the movie to him was perfect before it was ever filmed. Every angle, every whatever was plotted, which is very much like, reminds one, of course, the first thing that comes to mind is Brian Wilson's Lost Smile album, where that is still today, it remains today, the perfect album. Not the one he eventually made called Smile, but the original one that doesn't exist. Because I remember, I collected all those bootlegs. I got more Smile bootlegs than, you've had Hot Lunches, and, which if you don't know, it's just a bunch of fragments. The songs would have this, there'd be a recording of this section, and then it'd be another recording, totally different. And the point is that he never finished any of it, particularly. And so the listener is left with an album that can only exist in his imagination. You can hear all these pieces that are never connected, and you can only connect them in your mind, And that, to me, that is perfect. That's perfect. And the brilliance of that is that he had just recorded Good Vibrations, which everybody still to this day, if you're smart, like me, will tell you is the perfect rock pop single of all time. Period. Forget all this other stuff. That's perfection. So what do you do if you're Brian Wilson and because he knew that he had created perfection in Good Vibrations. So what do you do next? Now there's all this other stuff about how, he was having some problems in his head. Yeah, maybe, but I don't count that stuff. He did, whatever it was, he was right, because the only way to do the perfect album is what happened with Smile. It only exists in your imagination. And that taught me a whole lot, understanding that the perfection will only exist for something that doesn't exist. George had a hat, but it wasn't where it wasn't at. So what in the world am I talking about now? Part of Pere Ubu that I wanted to bring out in this record, excuse me, and in this methodology is what I call the intrusive other. It's this point of view that the best, to my mind, best expresses the human condition, where you have a narrative and then you have a cross narrative simultaneously and a counter narrative, and in a narrative that's utterly irrelevant to anything that's going on, all contained within one song, one piece. That, to me, is the human experience. The human experience is one of doubt and confusion, hope and fear, I wanted to set up a scenario where everybody had a different idea of what the song was going to be, This person thought, it's going this way, it's going this way, and so that was the goal. And then I, like the CIA, am in the center, with my tangled web of spider web, and I'm the only one who knows anything that's going. I'm the only one who knows anything, So my job is to weave together these different visions, these different versions of things. Some of them conflicting, some of them unrelated to each other, so that the hope is always to tell a story like human beings tell stories and like human beings live. People don't live and think like most pop songs. They just don't, If you listen to, all these stupid people expressing these stupid romantic versions of love and nonsense on the pop radio, back through the ages. It's not any more different now than it was 40, 50 years ago, except maybe classy or done back then when, But, this isn't the way people are. I fear that people are learning to be that way. This is the pessimist in me coming through. But nobody is like that in real life. You're always beset by doubt. And one of the things that my manager hates, she loathes this song, to me is one of the ultimate points of the record, a song called Walking Again, where you've got this sort of cock rock narrative going on, excuse my language, but it's the best phrase for it, going on. And then all of a sudden the narrator goes, I guess so. Where you've got this whole strutting sexuality thing, and then, then he goes, this will be the best you've ever had, best thing you've ever had, I guess. I mean, that to me is just bam, a sucker punch of reality.
Do you think that the dark room approach was effective? Do you think it worked?
Oh, I don't know. I'll know in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. I don't know. Yeah, I think nothing ever works the way you want, and which is why I keep doing records. If I could do one perfect record, if I could do just good vibrations, if I could just do one song ever perfectly, I'd quit. I'd stop, because what's the point? Failure is the great impetus that I have, and in my career, being confronted every time I do anything with the utter failure of my ability to achieve what I want. So people talk about, oh, you've got so much confidence. I don't have confidence. I hate failing. I don't want to go out a failure.
You've talked about the new record as being the most American sounding that you've made for a while, and also the most blue collar. What do you mean by that?
Well, number one, there is an American approach to the beat. There's a difference between the way foreigners, you people, hear something versus the way an American would hear it or play it. And what this is categorizable, I'm not sure. It reminds me of when the early bluesmen were coming over to England, and you get somebody like Muddy Waters or Howlin' Wolf or somebody come over in early 60s, late 50s, and they'd have a pickup band. They'd have an English pickup band. And the English tried to organize it all. Howlin' Wolf or Muddy Waters, or Robert Johnson, if he'd been alive and experiencing it, they don't count things. Blues isn't based on how many bars something is, or that whole that whole thing came from these British pickup bands that, would try to straighten out and correct the Howlin' Wolf, song, and so they'd get it all tightly organized, and Wolf would be just sitting there going, "You're not listening to me, listen, to what I'm doing. Don't try to organize me, and that, there's a certain amount of that coming from because you are foreigners playing somebody else's music. This all became. I was sent to Siberia, to Tuva and Novosibirsk and Barnaul, really out Siberia, 1990 or something like that, to do a story about rock music in Siberia, and this very famous Russian underground rock journalist who later became Minister of Culture or something, under Yeltsin or something like that, would say to me, there's an authenticity that exists in the most average garage band in Omaha, Nebraska, that is non-existent in the best English band there is, or in this, because they're play, and this is the way the Russians are. I mean, the Russians are kind of nutsy, because he'd be talking about, the band in Omaha is playing the music of their blood. There's something that is fundamental to them, and to their culture, and to the geography, and to their whole life experience that is non-existent anywhere else in the world. Because, it's a difference of, which would you rather go to? Would you, there's a band playing in town playing reggae music and they're from Jamaica, and there's a band in town playing reggae music and they're from Birmingham or Omaha. Which one, sight unseen, unheard, are you going to go see? You're going to go see the one from Jamaica, basically, if you don't know anything about any of it, So, and the English don't like to hear this stuff, but that's okay. The English, the true genius of English music is things like Soft Machine and Peter Hamill or the Van de Graaff Generator or 100 other things, Richard Thompson, Eliza Carthy, 100 other things, that are about being English, The Rolling Stones, they're an okay rock band, okay. I can't criticize them, but I'd rather go see something from Omaha, So this is all sort of an intangible answer to your question, and probably it's not good promotion for the record in England, because you get people's backs up when you say things like this, but I'm not going to lie to you. So I would, and often do, but in this circumstance, I think one of the people I admire most in the music industry ever is John Lydon. Unquestioned, to this day, irritating son of a bitch, or whatever he is, he's a live free or die guy, and that's English, that sort of bullshit sort of thing, as well, which you say is connected to punk, maybe. I'm not a great admirer of punk, because it's an alien. It's alien culture. It doesn't connect to me. Whereas some forgotten guy in a missile silo every day, staring at the button to Kingdom Come. I understand that. Now, I'm not a militarist, and I'm not any of that sort of thing. But you think about that, and you think about this guy. You know, he's got a family, he's got a wife, got kids, goes home at night. You know, so I guess that's what I mean by blue collar. I mean, we come from the Midwest. We're not from New York. You know, we're not from LA. We're not from some cultural, you know, and in Cleveland, if, you know, what you learn very quickly, or what you did learn very quickly is that, you know, the people who talk about the most about something understand it the least. You know, that one of the hallmarks of wisdom is silence. You know, you never argue with an idiot, because a third party won't be able to tell the difference between the two of you. You know, and we played for, you know, there might have only been 100 people coming to our show at the Viking, at the Pirates Cove, you know, along with the sailors from the Lake Ore boats, you know, who stumbled in drunk, you know, but they were working people. They worked, and they paid their money. They gave us a portion of their lives, which is what their salary was, you know, a portion of their salary. And we felt a great obligation not to give them what they wanted, which who the hell knows what that was, you know, but to create something special and unique. And if they liked it, brilliant. You know, if they didn't like it, okay, it's only $3 or $4, and we did the best we could. You know, so there's that sense of obligation that stays with us today. You know, about giving people value for money and being good entertainment in the way that playing chess is good entertainment. You know, it's not for everybody. You know, but it's entertainment.
Perhaps we could close by just talking about the very last track on the album, Cold Sweat.
Mm-hmm.
It's unusual. Your singing voice is very quiet, and it almost has a sort of sense of, you know, if you'd have said this is the last ever Pere Ubu album, that song somehow would be a fitting finale.
Yeah.
What made you decide to choose what to sing in that very measured or very quiet particular voice?
Well, you choose a voice for the story, you know, for the character. Yeah, it was very difficult to sing because I'm barely pushing air. It took a lot of time to get it up to a level of, because when you're not pushing air, then you really have very little control of things, you know. But no, you know, when you do, you know, all of the album are different stories, and I use, you know, on Monkey Business, you know, I use a totally different voice. Again, that these aren't the people in these songs are not me. You know, that's not. I've always been irritated by the singer-songwriter ethos or aesthetic, where, you know, everybody assumes that this is about you. No, you know, all of our songs, particularly the new album, are like looking out. Again, there's this American poet from the 50s called Lawrence Ferlinghetti, and he wrote this poem. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but it's about basically crossing America in a train, and he goes by this station, and there's a watchman with a lantern held up as he passes by in the train. Ferlinghetti passes by in the train, and for a moment, in the window, he sees his face reflected on the head of this lantern man passing by, and that's sort of like what Pere Ubu songs are. They're momentary glances at a story passing by, and you choose a voice, and you choose a title, and you choose words or whatever. to tell the story in a way that we do, you know. I don't know that, and Cold Sweat is a powerful song. I think it's you know, of all the songs, I suppose I would say it's very personal. You know, it's you know, it's that sense of something running out of, and so you say, oh, you know, then you get all these people that connect it with me, like, oh, he's an old man. It's an old man song about, you know, time running away, but that's not particularly an old man thing. Most people have a sense of time running out at various points in their life. That whatever that something is ending, and so yeah, I guess it's sort of rather than personal. I suppose it's felt. I mean, I deeply feel it. You know. Which isn't to say that I don't feel other things, but you know, I don't trust feelings. You know, this Pere Ubu is not about feelings. You know, since you know which is again from the album, the song "Prison of the Senses." You know, there's this. You know, there's no. Everybody assumes, for instance, this. I'm synesthetic. Which, do you know what synesthesia is? It's a confusion of the senses. Some musicians who are synesthetic perceive music as color. They don't, it's not sound, it's color. Okay, I perceive music as, I'm basically tone deaf. I really cannot tell if a note is higher or lower than another one. If it's in a neutral acoustic environment, I'm just sitting there going, I don't know. And basically, you know, all music to me sounds like da 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 da. I mean, I'm singing, I can't get no satisfaction. Da 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 da. You know, so sound to me is, I perceive it as geometry or perspective. You know, and I can't hold a tune in my head. There is no music in my head. So when I sing a song, it's like I'm singing it for the first time. I can't remember what I'm supposed to be singing on the damn thing, you know, or what the melody or whatever it is. So I know how to shape my thoughts and shape my brain and shape parts of my body, like my throat or my lungs or whatever. I know how to shape them to yield the musical result that I want to yield. I've learned it like a monkey, you know, that if I want to make this sort of a note to fit into this context of what I'm hearing, that I do certain things, or make my brain do certain things, you know. Well, but we all assume we hear the same things, or we see the same things, or we feel the same way everybody else does. And, you know, there's a good reason to feel that way, but there are some people who there's no way we ever know what anybody else is feeling or sensing, you know, or seeing or hearing. But this is all the nature of telling stories, that the realistic way of telling it is, I'm just a schlub like you, you know, and I'm doing the best job I can to get through, you know. And that's sort of about the new album. You know, I mean, that's sort of like part of the message of the new album is, or not message, it's one of the themes of the new album, which is just, you know, I'm just a schlub like you, and I'm trying to get through this the best I can, you know. I guess it should be a sexier message than that, but tough. It's too late. You've already put the record out.